and welcome to another exciting episode on the Green Living Chat podcast. And today on the Environmental Sustainability Chat, we are going to talk about sustainability and our energy systems. I'm super excited about my conversation with Dr. Madhavi Venkatesan on this topic because Dr. Madhavi is joining me the second time on this podcast after several conversations with her, and she just has a lot to say. As the editor-in-chief of Sustainability and Climate Change Journal, a teaching professor of economics and sustainability in the Northeastern University in the USA, and also the founder of an NGO, Sustainability Practices, and the host of a podcast, Dr. Madhavi has several experience on this topic we are going to talk about today. On this podcast episode, we talked about the actual meaning of sustainability. We answered questions surrounding the impact of our energy systems on the environment. Are renewable energies sustainable? What do we have to do in moving forward about the high consumption rates that we have in the world? This conversation was just full of insights, and I learned so much from this conversation with Dr. Madhavi Venkatesan. She just has so much to give. Every second of the conversation was full of insights, and I really can't wait to share this episode with you. I just want to remind you that this episode is part one of a two-part series, and part two of the conversation will be coming up next week. So keep your fingers crossed as we get into the episode. But before we get into the episode, I would like you to know that Dr. Madhavi Venkatesan has a podcast where she discusses issues surrounding sustainability. Find details of this in the show notes. So 3 things as you listen to this episode. Why don't you like it or give us a star rating on any platform where you're listening to this podcast? Share the episode also with a friend or someone who really needs to hear this. And let's get to educate more people each and every day. So grab a coffee and let's get into this episode. You are listening to the Green Living Chat podcast, a podcast where we discuss emerging environmental issues around the world and to find sustainable solutions. I'm your host, David Ewusi-Mensah. We use this platform to support environmental-related initiatives, researches, and projects. This podcast is brought to you by EcoWamet Solutions in Ghana with a mission to going back to green. So join us on this train with new episodes this and every Sunday. Here we go. Hello, Madhavi. Thank you so much for joining me again on the Green Living Chats podcast.
I'm so happy to be here. So thank you so much. It's such a pleasure to speak with you, David.
Yeah, the first time I spoke to you, on the podcast, we had a very interesting session and the feedback has been amazing. I don't even just need feedback, but personally, I learned a lot of things from what you said and the things you shared on the podcast. Ever since, I've been trying to go back to it, trying to listen and get things from the way you speak. And I always tell you that every time I talk to you, I get new insights, I get new ways of thinking because you're just full of so much. And really, I just wish that I could have you every week on the podcast.
You're just too nice. Thank you, though.
Okay, so you have already introduced yourself to a lot of my audience, but for the sake of new audience and maybe someone who might not know you, can you tell us a little bit about yourself? And this time, I would like you to tell us about how you grew up and some of the childhood experiences that are very memorable to you.
Thank you for that opportunity. I really don't get too many chances to talk about how I became what I have become. And I don't think most of us are going to live past 100. So I think I could easily say I'm past middle age.
You'll be exceptional, you will.
But I'm an immigrant to the United States. My family is from India. I'm from a place we used to call Tamil Nadu, what's called now Chennai. And so I'm a Tamilian, and I have a caste, obviously, because of our caste system in India. But when my family moved here, we moved here with nothing. So we moved here and we were the benefactors, without even knowing it, perhaps, of the Civil Rights Act of 1964. For us, just like for almost any other ethnic minority group, we are tied to the plight and struggle of African Americans in the United States. And I think it's very important for us to acknowledge that our opportunities are related to their struggle. And so my family, we moved here. My parents were professionals and they went into their designated occupations. I'm an only child. And I had the benefit of having a family that actually moved across the United States on two major occasions. We started off in Illinois, and then we moved to California, and then we moved to Tennessee. The majority of my teenage life and college life, because I went to Vanderbilt in Nashville, was in Tennessee. My father was in the coal business, so directly tied me for my future and my understanding of energy sources, and also the differences and the perceptions of coal as being some sort of monolithic product, when in fact it has differences in composition depending upon where you get it. My first job as an economist right after undergraduate school was working for the Tennessee Valley Authority, which is a quasi-government institution set up by the Roosevelt administration to help with the economic development of the Tennessee Valley, and it operates primarily on coal. And at that time, the 1990 Clean Air Act amendments were going into effect. And those Clean Air Act amendments affected sulfur dioxide and nitrogen oxide emissions. And because of my relationship in the coal industry, my being an economist, I was able to provide greater insight with regard to the potential impacts in the Tennessee Valley. After that, I went to graduate school, got my PhD at Vanderbilt, and then did a postdoc. But my area of specialization in economics was actually in African American economic history and labor. And that's what I also did when I went to Washington University in St. Louis for my postdoc. I was a very young PhD. I was still in my 20s, and I didn't have the ego to really be able to champion myself in a very ego-centric discipline. And I say this because in many ways, economics mimics some of the big issues that we see as being issues in our global as well as national economy. It's a patriarchal system dominated by white men. And because economics is really about how I perceive the world as an economist and therefore provide advice, you can see very clearly if you have a homogeneous population of individuals who have never been marginalized, dictating policies and also determining the standardization of economic systems, more than likely it's going to eliminate a larger proportion of the world than it actually integrates. So I think that's one of the major reasons why we see the problems we have today, because the system as it was created is created as though there's only one single worldview. And unfortunately, we are all paying the price of that one single worldview because it has eliminated the diversity of thought and eliminated diversity of culture that's caused us to start looking at indigenous behaviors, which aren't necessarily indigenous behaviors. They're more aligned with pre-colonial behaviors.
Wow, you just give me so much every time I ask you a question. You give me a lot of inspirations when it comes to, what you represent, your background, your race. You have this strong motive to express yourself about the things that you stand for. I want to ask you that if you have the chance to speak to a little girl, speak to a little child who is now growing up wanting to become like you and looking at all the things that you said, how you transition your choices of courses, your choices of profession, what would you say to them? And what advice will you give them that when you're growing up, these are the things that you have to face, and these are the things what you have to do to overcome them?
The first thing I think that the most important thing is for us to, on a regular basis, adults as well as children, to sit back and really think, what is the purpose of our existence? And young children, because they don't have the burden of debt that we carry on when we don't know our purpose and we blindly follow the path that was already created for us of accumulation, they have probably a better potential to live a life of meaning and purpose if they don't allow themselves to get caught into the self-gratification trap that our economies are built on. So I guess the first thing I would say is to try to encourage any young person to start to think about what is the most important aspect of being alive to them, and do that beyond material things. Those may satisfy your sensory perceptions, but they are a trap. They don't really give you long-term happiness. And in fact, if you have to spend so much of your time maintaining your material things, then you don't really have much time to live. So that would be the first thing. But then secondly is we live in a world I don't know if the history of human oppression to itself has always existed or not. I don't know. We live only in the world that we see. I have my thoughts about the concept of oppressive behavior and collectivism and competition. But I would say not to get caught up in the focus of how you're being oppressed, because that will make you a victim of the oppression. Find the ways where you can walk around the oppressiveness that you face to attain the purpose that you've determined for yourself. I think one of the areas that has been the best for me, I don't necessarily think this is the best route, this is just what's worked for me, is that whenever I've dealt with circumstances that made me feel lesser, I chose purposely to no longer subject myself to those situations and ignore them. Because if you take it to your heart, it affects your strength.
If someone is listening to this, can pick up these things, because there are a lot of things, pressures from so many different directions on us right now. Just this afternoon, I was watching a video during lunch, and there was a Black lady who went to a shop to buy something, and she was denied to buy the thing here in China. The lady didn't want to sell the things to her because she's Black. And the lady went out of the shop to cry so hard. And the good thing she did was that she went back to the shop and she says, I insist. I want to buy the scarves. I want to buy. And I love that. And it's actually the same thing that if you take it to heart, because she went out and cried, but later she had to go back in and stand for herself. And the other lady had no reason but to just sell the thing because both of you benefit. So it's a very powerful thing that you said. And I think that it's really good that people listen to this. So with that being said, I would like to say congratulations as well. You are now the editor-in-chief of Sustainability and Climate Change Journal, right?
Yes, thank you very much. Thank you.
Yeah, I was really happy to see that, because I know that you so represent what the position you have, and I'm just waiting. Hopefully, I can write something and send it there. I have good chances of getting published.
I hope you will send something. And so I hope other people in your listener group will also look up the journal and send
Yes, we're going to put the links to the journal in the show notes. So definitely anyone who is looking to publish a book within this field, sustainability and climate change, should consider this journal as well. And let's get a little bit into the topic for today. Today, we want to discuss about our energy systems and how sustainable they are. So first, we have to define what sustainability is. There are so many definitions here and there, but can you give us the basics of sustainability? If we hear the word sustainability, what should come to our mind?
Sustainability in general has one definition that's actually the working definition that we see embedded in most documents discussing it, which is the Brundtland Commission report, and its first statement as to what sustainability should entail, which is to basically meet the needs of the present generation without affecting the ability for the future generations to meet their needs. It's a pretty general statement. It's basically very similar to my freedom ends where yours begins. But when we think about sustainability in operation, there are typically three pillars that we identify: economic equity, social justice, and environmental justice. And those are the elements that we take into consideration when we look at putting sustainability into practice. When we think about it from our daily life, though, sustainability fundamentally is about limiting the human footprint. And I look at it from this angle. As humans, because we have so many opportunities and so many abilities to augment the natural environment, and because other organisms may be so small that they're not perceptible to us, but we're still dependent upon them because of the ecosystem that we all share. What this means for humans is that we actually have to be much more cognizant, much more knowledgeable when we move out a piece of dirt. We have to be thoughtful when we think about eliminating or planting a garden, because it's not just about us. It's about the ecosystems that we create just when we put an action into place. And this is the part I think that's very difficult for many people to understand, that they talk about planting trees to eliminate carbon impacts, but what they're not considering is that trees too are sentient beings. It's not just about planting trees as though you're just sticking something in the ground. You're creating villages, societies, organisms that are going to interact with one another. And we don't really think about it from that perspective, because even when we are supposedly doing things that are environmentally conscious, we're doing them from a very much superiority perspective, that somehow our sentience is superior to that of any other creature. So we don't take into consideration the responsibility that's also inherent in sustainability, which is the preservation of other life, its ecosystems, and its family, its own family creations, its own social cohesion and networks. So that portion of sustainability we have yet to attain. We actually are failing at it very miserably, and that may be why a lot of our sustainability efforts are not really amounting to much, because we're not taking into consideration what other species' needs are. We're still looking at it from a very human-centric approach.
Wow, this is a very interesting definition. I think it's actually what we are supposed to know, but it has been twisted. I actually this afternoon also saw a post on LinkedIn about this new toilet seats cover. They made it from biodegradable plastics. So I just checked the comments that were going through this post, and everyone was saying, "Oh, good job. This is," but I was thinking about it. Really, toilet seats, and we have to wrap it with biodegradable plastics, and then afterwards you just use it, take it out, and throw it away. How many people use that bathroom in a day? And how many of those biodegradable plastics are going to go out there? I spoke to someone in packaging and says that the industry is not ready for biodegradable plastics. And so we shouldn't confuse it at all with the already existing plastics. So we are actually thinking that we are attaining sustainability, but from the definition you're given, which is actually what it is, we are actually going far away. We just think about what we are doing and just trying to be green. And that's it.
I would argue back that the person who created that toilet seat, knowing that there was no infrastructure for it, is just trying to line their pocket by giving people a false perception. I mean, there are two issues in this case too. One is that people don't educate themselves enough to understand basic issues and are very easily duped based on whatever they're marketed. But the other portion is the lack of virtue. I'll use a very basic word from moral philosophy, basis of economics, the lack of virtue on the part of the producer that is able to live with the hypocrisy of the product that they're creating, to give this perception that it's better, even though they know it's not.
Yeah.
And that part of our society is probably one of the basic reasons why it doesn't function very well, because you have people willing to take advantage of other people's ignorance or suffering from their own innate cognitive dissonance to justify their own marketing processes.
Hi there, just a quick one. Whilst I was just editing this episode, something just came to mind based on the conversation I was having with Dr. Madhavi Venkatesan. So I put together a poll asking the question, what will make an industry keep producing something that they know is not sustainable to the environment or healthy to people? And the answers that are coming out, it's so interesting, and I would like you to just go into the show notes for a link to this poll and share your thoughts as well on this conversation. We will discuss outcomes of this poll on part 2 of this conversation next week. Let's get back into this conversation. It's really true. It's something we really have to pay attention to. And that's why I believe that we're just trying to educate people on what is right. At least just find out for yourself and get to know at least the products that you're using. But Madhavi, you know that because of technology growth now, because of population growth and everything, sustainability has turned in a certain way. And the approach towards it is it's a little bit different. But one of the major things, of which is the topic for today, is energy. Energy demand has really, really escalated. But my question now is, how do we know the impact the energy systems that we have on the environment?
Well, some of them are already known because they're older forms, such as fossil fuels. Some of them are known. When we look at nuclear facilities, we know that we don't know how to handle the waste. The unknowns really are with solar and wind. Hydro, I would say we also know. That's why we're dismantling dams in the developed countries, because we realize the ecosystem damage that we've done, but we still deploy them in developing countries, which just like we will talk about with coal in a moment. But with the two unknowns, or the emerging technologies of solar and wind, we know enough. We know enough to say that we need to implement a cautionary deployment, because unfortunately, yet again, we're only looking at the consumption life cycle of that particular product. We're not looking at the resource intensity of its production, nor, even more importantly, the disposal impact. Both of those products, wind or solar, neither was designed to be cradle to cradle. So in both cases, they suffer from the same issues as many other products that we consume. The disposal component was thought of as free, even though the disposal component could potentially be the most toxic element of the whole benefit that we gain from the deployment for energy production. I'm very saddened by the deployment of so-called green technologies, because they aren't coming with the idea of reduction of use. They are coming with the idea that we can maintain the level of consumption that we currently have. They're not taking into consideration that we need to look, if we're truly looking at green, at a life cycle impact on the creation of that product. And even more importantly, like we just discussed with regard to the hierarchy of life, they don't take into consideration the impact on other species and other life forms.
Yeah.
They only look specifically at what's going to happen for humans. And what we discussed actually earlier at another time was related to human ability to adapt without having to use so much energy, by looking at natural technologies that already exist, building structures in a way that maintain the coolness in spite of the heat outside, in a way using nature as a means of our own protection from nature. We don't do that. We keep looking for artificial means. And we also look to maintain the economic system as we have it today, specifically the US economic system, which is to look at production-based growth, which requires jobs. So the reason why you see green taking off is because you're trying to do a job shift from other jobs that are being lost as a result of the need to adopt more green infrastructure to saying that these are the new jobs of the future. What you are not taking into consideration is principally the population is an issue, and this constant movement to growth in jobs is an issue. Having a production-based economy is an issue, because that means you're, in spite of the fact that you're switching to a greener source, you're going to still continue to deploy new products. I think that there's anything that we do to preserve our way of life, so to speak, without recognizing that the way of life that we have created is what needs to be changed, it's only going to keep us in the same direction that we're currently on, which is not a good one.
You've already mentioned about green sources, and it's actually in direction with renewable energies. I think that as you mentioned, we already know the impact that our energy sources has on the environment. And that's why now everyone is talking about renewable energy sources. But when we had a call earlier, we discussed something, and you made a phrase, and I think it was very impactful. And I think you even talked about it earlier. You said humans make impact on the environment, and now they turn around to behave as if they are fighting against nature. And you also made another statement that every energy source has an impact on the environment. So whether it's renewable or not, so far as you're touching or making a footprint on the environment, every energy source has a footprint. But the problem is the levels of impact. What do we know about renewable energy sources, and what are the impact on the environment if we want to think about, let's say, sustainable economy?
I think what we know about solar is that we can trap the sun's energy and we can make power. What we don't know is about our solar panels, because we're now starting to work on these new technologies that will reduce the toxicity of the waste. But right now, the disposal of a solar panel is to put it in a landfill. And you think about the types of elements that are in there, they're highly toxic. What do we get from the ground? Water. So one of the three basic things we need to live, water, is contaminated. And we're doing that so that we can have a quality of life, but it's actually determining the demise of that quality of life in the way that we handle disposal. And then when we look at wind may look like it's a great technology, but this is where I was having a conversation with somebody else about this. They didn't really answer the question directly, but I'm going to answer the question. We live in a system where we deploy products and we only pull them off the market when there's sufficient information to tell us that they're bad for us. Mm-hmm. We don't deploy products with the precautionary principle in mind, looking to see first how they may adversely impact us before we put out a huge deployment. So what does this mean? That means that the deployment happens on a mass scale, and then we find out about the issues related to it afterwards. Too many people already have traction and dependence, or even their financial dependence on that particular product's deployment. So now we have to fight back in order to actually promote our well-being against a product that's been entrenched. And when we do provide a salve, typically it's nothing that really changes behavior, but just maybe substitutes for that product. I give a simple example is plastic. Plastic is a perfect example. Now you're talking about bioplastics. I mean, we're not thinking of trying to eliminate this, which is really the smarter thing to do. We're trying to find different ways to ease the substitution of it by saying it has lesser impact. Well, if you're going to die, a lesser impact on how you die doesn't really affect much. I mean, maybe bioplastics may create a different type of pathogen response than the petroleum-based products that we currently have, but neither one of them is beneficial to the Earth system. And so I think that the issue really we have to come to terms with is this whole system that we are in is based on a human control of the environment without recognition that we are dependent and we are natural beings in that environment. It is a mistake. We have to say, we made a mistake. Let's correct this and figure out how we can recognize that we are the environment as well, that is who we are. And we have a mutual interdependence on our part to protect and preserve it, and on the environment's part to give us life as a result. When you run a business and you create a bad product, you're going to be a bad CEO if you continue to promote that product, right? Eventually, you're going to be sued. The Earth doesn't have an ability to sue us, but she does have an ability to bring on the damage that we have done and let us see it firsthand. And she is doing that with all her force and all her might. And many of us are seeing it right now. We have to change our trajectory. We do not control the environment. She controls us. And in spite of all of these different sciences we have never been able to control the weather. This tells you how very basic our knowledge is.
Yeah, this is very true. And it brings to mind something you said the other time on the podcast we had. And I asked you a question about if you have the chance to change just one thing about human behavior towards the environment. And you made mention of love. And I kept thinking about it, even when we were having the discussion, because it was the last question, because people are doing so many things. And the whole idea is, yes, how can we get our company's budget? How can we get our bank accounts multiplying in the next couple of months? Meanwhile, they really know that it's not good. Yeah, because they brought plastics in saying that it could be recycled. Meanwhile, they knew that the system was not ready to recycle all the amounts of plastics they were producing. And in the same way, it comes to renewable energies. A lot of sources are coming. We are coming in with this, but all these things need infrastructure. And we forget that the infrastructure also do have a footprint on it. And if you're producing it, yes, of course, you're introducing a new infrastructure or something. You should think about how to dispose it or how to recycle it to become another product. And even in that journey of recycling, does it even have an impact on the environment? So really, I think that we have become very selfish and we have become very self-centered, and everything is just about us. I think a lot of people will not agree with what we're saying, but it's actually the truth if they sit down for a second to think about this.
Yes, I mean, just going back to the question you asked too about wind, and I went off on a tangent with the plastics, but when we look at wind, we know that there's evidence for certain areas, for certain human beings feel the vibrations for land-based wind. That we do know. People have made comments with regard to sensitivities there. But we also know that there's evidence that there is oceanic life disturbance as a result of offshore wind. Now, the first thing people will say is there aren't enough studies for this. This goes back to my point about plastics. We deployed a product because we are a speed to market economy. We're looking to make money on the deployment of product, not necessarily looking at the viability of the product or its limitation in harm. We assume no harm until it's proven, as opposed to proving no harm before we use. And so in the same case, we are deploying these products, wind and solar, without thinking about the potential harm, increasing traction by actually creating these jobs systems that are related to these industries, which means now you have a whole section of the economy that's dependent on their own wealth for their own welfare. So you're pitting people's own individual interests against the interest of society and the globe at large. And who's going to win in those cases? It's going to be the group of people in those industries, unfortunately, because we don't have an alternative energy source, because there's a sensitivity to maintaining the normality of how an economy operates. But you could have prevented all of that by being more precautionary and not deploying a product before it has traction and may actually have harm to a system. I think it's very unfortunate that across all of our educational systems, and I do blame our economy for this too, the economic framework that we operate under, that we do not promote an idea of process thinking, and we promote only an idea of goal-oriented attainment as being the focus of any action. Because process thinking wants you to eliminate risk, and it's a risk management process. You're actually happy when you can maintain life the way you know it. Goal-oriented thinking can be more transactional, can be something that's related just to attainment of money or status. It has nothing to do with how you attained those elements. If we could have a society that was process-oriented as opposed to goal-oriented, which means that you get value for whatever you do based on your ability to do no harm, to mitigate risk, that would be consistent with a love-based or collective-based society.
Ooh, so I want us to draw a conclusion at this point where we've gotten to before we proceed. So what point are we trying to make? Renewable energies, of course, are renewable. Let's say they do have lesser impact on the environment. But are we saying that because of the infrastructure or because of the life cycle analysis, it doesn't make it renewable? What are we saying?
We're saying that it's great to have a renewable technology which has a lesser harm impact on an emissions level. That's one thing. That's the only area. That's the area that we're focused on, is that greenhouse gas emissions. But we aren't reducing the human impact. We're just reducing the emissions impact. And I think that's a part that's really important to take into consideration. So when we're looking at creating more sustainable technologies, does this kind of focus fit that bill? And I don't believe it does. What we really need to do if we're looking at promoting sustainability is not only reduce the use of fossil fuel technologies because we are understanding the adverse consequences of emissions, but also look and seek to reduce the human footprint of any kind of energy source, because we have to look at all the other elements, which are the life cycle impacts. And also one more thing, but I'll get to that in one second. But the other aspect of this is also to reduce consumption, period. And we have been warned on many times in this history, in the last 80 years, that we need to reduce energy consumption. So this is the part that's important. So many of our products today that we use in daily use are purely energy dependent. Again, a moment ago, I was talking about infrastructure and how when you create jobs around certain types of industries, you make it harder to pull back. Well, today, this generation that's growing up is completely dependent upon energy. They have tablets, phones, anything and everything. So this is the problem we have done, is not only increased use, but increased dependence. So our economic systems, our consumer products, everything are hugely energy dependent. So right now we have to pull back, go back to entertainment that's live. You go to the theater, you have to go back to phones that don't require us to constantly be engaged. We have to go back to a more simple time, because we are in the midst of understanding the impact of this so-called progress, which really hasn't progressed us. Families don't sit together to watch the television show that will only come once because they don't have recordings. People do not sit and watch the news to be informed. They sit and watch the news to be entertained. So therefore, the news media has really changed in general in terms of being an informative mechanism. If we look at every aspect of what this so-called technological progress has done, it has isolated individuals, prevented us from really understanding and being connected with other people's social welfare. It should have been able to increase our sensitization as to what happens between India, Africa, the United States, South America, Asia, but it doesn't. It's been used, in fact, just the opposite way, to desensitize us, to create more otherness in many, many ways with regard to other cultures, other peoples. This is something that we still have a chance right now. We have not been that entrenched in this. We have a chance to stop this, to say we need to move to a more simple existence, to be able to walk in the grass. How many of us can even walk in the grass where we live anymore because of the amount of chemicals that are put on our grass? Well, there's a thought process out there, David, that says that when we actually walk on the earth, it affects us as human beings, which would make sense if we're natural entities of the earth, but it's a way of also discharging electricity for us that's in our, because we're electrical systems ourselves. I mean, there's a lot more of this kind of science that should be done to help us understand our interconnectivity with the earth, but we spend a lot more time using science as a way of justifying the products that we make and saying that they aren't that impactful to the earth. It's a little strange. I think it's a little backward.
You know, I actually wanted us to make this conclusion to make things like really, really clear to someone who is listening. In as much as I know that for me, this makes a lot of sense and it's very meaningful to me if we really want to take this approach. But I know that there are a lot of arguments that are going to go out there thinking that what we are saying is not realistic, and that the age where we are in, technology world where we are transferring from industry 5.0 to more technical stuff and so many things, and it's not going to be possible. But if you sit down to think about this is what we really need. We're going to go a little bit into some case studies of renewable energies. Maybe we can just pick one or two and talk about it. But I just wanted to make this point really, really clear that I think it's about time that we all sit down and think about our lifestyles and really see the loopholes that are in it, the things that we are missing, right? We have now become like robots. If you sit back out of social life and you look at how people are moving up and down in our daily jobs, in our daily lives, we have missed the whole point. We don't interact anymore. You sit in the subway and everyone is on their phones. We don't interact anymore. But the people that we are interacting on the phones are actually sitting next to us. So how come we cannot even interact anymore? And it's true, we cannot change or reduce our level of consumptions if we don't change the way of life. Because just me, I have my computer, I have my phone, and I use them every day. I practically charge them every day. How do I move away from it? Because every work I have to do is on it. Even the podcast is on it. So it's a very difficult thing to change, but I think that collectively is something that we can do because we are all interconnected. If I decide to do it and the government does not make policies to regulate them, I think it's not going to work. But of course, the industries are, the new iPhone is coming and everyone is eager to get it. So it's a collective effort. Government doing the portion, individuals, consumers, the industries, everyone has a part to play. And this is a very interesting ball. I think we all need to be involved in making this change happen. Thank you so much for listening to this episode of the Green Living Chats podcast. This initiative is to educate and create awareness on things that really matter. We look forward to hearing your thoughts and comments as we get interactive on our social media platforms at Echo Ahmed Solutions on Instagram, Facebook, YouTube, and LinkedIn. If you would like to be part of these conversations, contact us via email at glcpodcast@echoahmedsolutions.com or see our contact details in the show notes. Part 2 of today's conversation will be available next week. So see you on the next episode, and remember, live green.